Hello, I'm John Adams, editor of Digital Photo, and welcome to this video lesson which is all about controlling contrast and colour in your shots. Now, if you're following our main feature through in sequence this month, you'll have seen that the first thing we do is take control of composition and perform some tweaks with either the crop tool or by using transform. And once you've got the elements of your image exactly where you want them to be, what we're going to run through here is the next task. Now we've got a nice sort of chocolate boxy landscape that I took in North Wales here. Got a pretty good sky, a nice mountainous backdrop, a lake in the middle distance, and of course a nice farmhouse down here in the foreground. But it's not very punchy, it's all a bit flat and a bit dull. And what we really want to do is have something a bit more like this. Something where we've balanced up the exposure so the sky and the land are working well together, and something where we've taken control of the colour balance of the scene and punched it up to make everything look a little bit more sunny. Now this is a really important technique, and it's done by making selections, feathering those selections, and then altering the contrast and the colour if necessary in separate areas of the picture. Just to briefly break it down, what it involves is starting with the starting point here, which is the image farmhouse.jpg, and then what we're going to do is darken that sky and give it a bit of a kick to get more contrast there. So now we've got a much better looking sky. Our foreground area is still far too dark though, so what we're going to do is punch that up as well. And once we've brightened the foreground, we're going to pick three areas and actually darken them slightly. The top of the sky, the bottom of the image, and this strip across the middle. Contrast is weakest in this area here because of recession, it's going into the distance. So I want to beef that up slightly, but by darkening the very top of the sky and the very bottom of the foreground, I'm going to kind of vignette the image and focus attention on the centre. But what I want is a kind of pool of light effect on this farmhouse. So that's what I'm going to work on next. It's a subtle change, but one that's worthwhile. And once I've made all those contrast changes, I'm going to work on the colour, because this image, in general, needs warming up. When I took the shot, it didn't really look like this. This looks too cool by comparison. What I actually had was much warmer lighting conditions, so I think really it's the white balance of the camera has let me down a little in this instance. So all I'm going to do is make an adjustment to the overall colour balance, and that will perk it up a bit and bring the sun out. So that's what we're going to do, and we're going to do everything using one very important command palette in Photoshop, or indeed in Elements, and that's the Levels palette. Everything we're about to perform is done with one palette and some selections. So let's get stuck in and see how it works. We'll go back to our starting point. That's this farmhouse.jpg. And the first thing we're going to do is select the sky. So we pick up our freehand lasso tool, this one here, and we're just going to make a rough selection around this area. You don't have to be too accurate, so just make a ziggy-zaggy selection along here, then round the top, all the way around the image and back to your starting point. Once you've done that, we need to feather that selection so that this bottom edge is nice and soft. And an easy way to do that is just click on the Refine Edge button up at the top of the screen in the options bar. This gives you the Refine Edge dialog box. It's slightly different in Elements, it's a little bit more simplistic than this one in Photoshop, but you get some various options to look at your image. You've got your straight selection option, which shows you the selection lines, or you can see it with a red mask on, and that shows you how much feathering you've got. And that's what we want to get to, a nice feathering on that bottom edge. And we're going to go for a feather amount of 150 pixels for this image. So make sure all your other boxes are set to 0, type 150 into feather and then click OK, and you'll soften that bottom edge of the selection you've made. Now that's done, we need our layers palette up on the screen. To do that, just go up to Window and choose Layers from the list. Mine's actually hanging off the side over here, so I'm just going to drag it back on screen. And then in the Layers palette, you'll see in Photoshop and in Elements, there's a half black, half white circle. This is the adjustment layer icon. Click that and from the list select Levels. Elements has got a slightly shorter list than this, but pick Levels because it's on there. This brings up your Levels adjustment layer, and in here we've got our histogram. That's this clump of pixels. They're all the pixels in the image, and we've got three sliders: black, midpoint or gamma, and white. And to darken that sky selection, we're going to move the black point inwards a bit. And if you look at the sky when you move the midpoint, let's get that up there so we can see what's happening. Watch this bit of sky, and you can see that whole area darken. Now you can go too far, and one way to check whether you've gone too far is to hold down the Alt key on the keyboard when you're sliding it. And that shows when you get to black. Let's just get that out of the way. If we move that slider while we're holding Alt, you can see there as it moves in, that there is where you black out. That first sign there of blue means that the colour is blocking out. So what you've got is pure shadow or pure black there without any other detail. So we don't want to go that extreme, but it's a handy tip there to hold the Alt key when you're moving the sliders. Then you can see when your image starts to clip. Right, so that's too dark. We're going to pull it back a little bit. We want some natural looking clouds. I think somewhere around there. So we've got kind of a sort of halfway, about 76 in the input levels for the black point slider. And then the midpoint slider, we're going to move that slightly to the right as well. You can see that just darkening the sky. That's okay, we can always adjust it later. These are adjustment layers after all, but that'll do me for now, so I'm just quickly going to close that down to get it out the way. If you're using an older version of Photoshop or Elements that has an OK button in the adjustment layer, click it. You'll find it, let me just open it again. You'll see the OK button down here somewhere. If you've got one, click it. If you haven't got one, don't worry about it. You can just shut it down. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is repeat that process, only this time we're going to take in this foreground area. So back to the freehand lasso, and then we're just going to draw around the image, sort of a rough selection through this part, all the way around the outside of the picture, and back up to our starting point. Release the mouse there, and you can see again we've got our marching ants around the bottom half of the image. We need to feather this again, so refine edge is the button to tick, and again we want a feather radius of about 150 pixels. That's already set because we've just used that, so click OK. And we'll have a nice soft edge selection. Levels adjustment layer once more, so click on the adjustment layer icon and choose levels from that list. There we have it again, and this time we're going to brighten up our foreground. We'll just dock that palette so we can see what we're doing nicely. That's good. We're going to move in our white point slider here, and you can see that foreground brighten. Again, you can use the Alt key if you want to, and you can see where things start to clip. You can see by moving our white point in quite a way, we're blowing out the house. That's gone, and the water's starting to go as well. So that's approaching peak white, where we have no detail at all. Don't worry too much about that. Release the Alt key so you can see the image. We're just going to get it to roughly where we want it. That's okay. I'm just going to tweak the middle slider as well, just a touch. Just brighten up the whole thing a little bit. And you can see by doing that, I've washed out the contrast. So I'm now going to just tweak the black point slider in very slightly. That's enough there. And you can see what we have now is a much brighter foreground that's pretty well balanced against the sky. So we've got the kind of picture we might have taken if we balanced up in camera and used a neutral density graduated filter over the sky just to darken that. But we've got there anyway with some judicious use of levels. But what we have to do now is restore detail to the areas where we've blown it. So we'll keep this adjustment layer up on screen because this mask here, that's the bit we're going to edit. If you remember the selection we made, and we can look at it if you hold Alt and click right on the mask, there's the selection we made across this part here. So the white part of the image is the bit that's affected by this levels adjustment layer, and the black part of the image isn't affected at all. Hold Alt and click again on it to return. What we need to do then is paint a bit of black over the areas where we've blown our highlights, and that will restore the detail. Really simple to do. Make sure your mask is selected there. It'll have a little rectangle around it. And all we have to do is zoom in tight first and foremost on our farmhouse. Let's just go in there. That should do the trick. And then we're going to pick up a brush from the toolbox and we're going to set our opacity. It'll be on about 100% by default. Take it right down to about 30%. So you can do a nice subtle job. In terms of brush size, about 40 pixels looks okay. If you want to use the square brackets keys, they'll take you up and down in brush size, so you can do that quite quickly. And you ideally want a nice soft edge brush for this, so use Shift and the square bracket keys to make your brush softer or harder. Okay, once you've got the right sort of brush size, we're just going to work away at the farmhouse. And a few strokes should start bringing that detail back. And as we do that, if you look over at this mask, you can see just there a little bit of black appearing, and that's where we're painting out the mask and allowing the detail to come through. So we'll just continue with that, and that's looking pretty good like that. That's got the detail back in our brickwork in the house. And we'll do a little bit of that roof as well, just to darken it down. That's quite nice. Jolly good. Now we can hold the spacebar and scroll around the image and see if there's anywhere else. There's a little bit maybe in the water where we lost some detail. So I'll just take the opacity down even lower. I'm going to go down to about sort of 15%, something like that. I'm going to use a nice big brush. Just increase brush size with the right square brackets key. I'm just going to go across that water just a couple of dabs like that with a brush, just to bring back any detail we might be losing in those areas. I think that's enough now. Just a subtle bit of masking. I'm just going to double click the hand tool now to go back to full screen. And if you want to look at that mask, Alt and click on the mask and you can see what we've done. That's where we've brought back the detail in the water, and there's our painting on the house area to bring back the detail in that part of the image. Okay, Alt and click again to get rid of that. Now that's done, what I want to do is add some strips of light and shade. I want to darken the top part of the image and then reflect that in the bottom of the image, just to kind of hem the image in and focus attention on the center. I'll do that again with a lasso tool, so pick that up and then just do a selection along that top of the image. There we go, just along there. Once you've done that, hold down the Shift key, because that means add to the selection, and you'll see a small plus sign appear alongside the lasso icon. Then we're just going to draw along the bottom of the image as well, just taking in this area here. That gives us kind of a hem on the top and the bottom of the picture. The next thing, the lowest contrast bit we've got, is in the middle of the image here, around these mountains and the middle distance. So what I'm going to do is put a selection strip through that area as well. So hold down Shift again and just draw through that area, just that central area of the image, taking in the lake and those mountains. Something like that should do the trick. So we've got those three strips. We need to feather those to make the edges really soft. So again, pop up to Refine Edge and go for about 150 pixels. You can see what kind of graduation you're getting there. That's exactly right. 150 pixels there in feather, and click OK to that. Now, you've guessed it, it's time for yet another levels adjustment layer. So we click on the adjustment layer icon and we choose levels once more. This gives us a wonderfully stripy levels 3 adjustment layer at the top of the stack. We're just going to tweak the middle slider on this one just to make everything a little bit darker. So move it slightly to the right and you can see that change happening. If you jiggle the thing about, you can see we've got a darker sky forming just at the top and that nice darkness at the bottom, a nice bit of shadiness. And it's just cutting down that middle part of the image. So we haven't got quite so much distance recession going on. I think that's about right there. I've got 0.81, but your eyes are the best judge of this. See how you get on with that and just set it as you see fit. Right, with that all done, the image is looking pretty good, but it's still a bit too cold for my liking. As I said in the introduction, I remember this being a day of much warmer lighting, so what I want to do is bring the sun out a bit more strongly. And to do that, I'm going to use a warm-up effect. Now, there are loads of ways of doing this in Photoshop, but a nice neat way is done again using levels. So I'm going to create another levels adjustment layer, only this time I'm not going to make a selection first because I want this change to apply globally. I want it to apply across the whole image. So I pop over to the adjustment layer icon, click on that and choose levels again, and we get a levels 4 adjustment layer at the top of the stack. This one's all white in the mask, and that means it applies to everything underneath, so it's going to apply to the entire image. In our levels palette, you can see we've got RGB. Now that stands for red, green and blue, the 3 channels that make up every colour in the image, and we can actually split those and work on them individually. So if I click on the downward facing arrow, we've got red, green and blue separately. So I'm going to pick red, and now any changes I make to these sliders will only apply to the red channel. That means by moving the midtone slider to the left, I can increase the red content of that image. And you can see it getting very red as we go towards the left. Now that's a little bit too far, that's gone a bit nuclear. So what we want to do is just move it very subtly over to the left. And I think something like that's probably enough. I've got 1.16. So starting at 1.0 is the basic setting for the gamma slider or the midtone slider. Go above that and you'll be increasing the red content. So once we've got there, we're now going to swap to a different channel because I need to introduce some yellow into the mix as well. Now if we look at the channels, we've got red, green and blue. There's no yellow there. But yellow is the opposite of blue on the colour wheel. So if we select blue and move the slider the other way, we increase yellow. So we get hold of our middle slider again with the blue channel selected. We just tweak that slightly in the rightward direction. There we go. And you can see that yellow increasing the more we go over to the right. Now again, that's too much. So all we need is a little way adrift of 1. So probably high 80s, maybe just into the 90s. Something like that should be good. I've got 0.87. And if you want to see the impact that color adjustment is having, all you've got to do is click on and off this visibility icon here. So we'll turn it off. There's our rather cool looking image. By turning it on, we see a much warmer looking picture. And remember, they're called adjustment layers, so any of these things you can change. If I just expand the layers palette so we can see everything we've done. There we go, there's all of our layers. Let's just move it up a touch. All of these are all floating and they're all adjustable. So if we want to make our sky a bit darker, we just click on this adjustment layer. And now we can adjust that sky and make it more dramatic or less dramatic depending on what we want to achieve. We can also go on the foreground. We just click on that adjustment layer, and that too can be adjusted so we can make it a bit lighter or a bit darker if we like. Our strips, we can do the same thing. They're fully adjustable, and of course even our color balance is adjustable too. Just remember to go onto the red channel or the blue channel because they're the ones you changed. So if we want a bit more red in that to make it even hotter, we can just tweak that through there. That's very hot now, but we'll run with that because I like a nice warm picture. And there we have it. That's the difference we've made to our picture. We started with a very cold looking image that's underexposed in the foreground and kind of blandly exposed across the sky. What we did, we darkened that sky first and foremost, then we brightened up the foreground to get everything balanced up. We then put a kind of a pool of light effect across this central portion of the image by adding some strips of contrast, and then finally we just tweaked the color balance to give a much warmer overall feel to the picture. And that's pretty much all there is to basic color and contrast work. On 99% of your pictures, that's all you're going to need to do, just to tweak them as they come out of the camera, balance things up and improve the colors. Of course, there's still a little bit more we could do. If we zoom in tight, we can see there's a bit of clutter in the picture that we wouldn't really want. This van here, I'd want to move that because I think it's spoiling the image. And maybe the caravan as well we could get rid of. But of course, that involves cloning and healing, and you'll find the next video lesson is all about that very subject. Now, one thing before I go, I've used the full version of Photoshop to do this tutorial, but I've used all the commands and controls that are accessible to Elements users as well. One option you have in the full version of Photoshop is to use curves. So you will find another video lesson that uses curves instead of levels. They're much smarter than levels, so have a look at part 2 to see how you can do this warm-up and contrast technique using curves. Alright, thanks for listening, and see you soon.